My name is Rachel, and I am 34 years old. What I am about to share with you is the story of how the people who were supposed to be my anchors became the very storm I had to survive, and how, in the wreckage, I found the strength to build my own shelter. What happened next was even worse than the initial betrayal, a cascade of calculated cruelty that forced me to redefine everything I thought I knew about family and love. If you're watching this, you might be someone who has felt the unique sting of being misunderstood and maligned by those closest to you, or perhaps you've had to walk away from a relationship you desperately wanted to save. No matter where you are in the world right now, please take a moment to let me know in the comments. And if the feeling of being excluded, of having your truth twisted, resonates with you on a deep level, please hit that like button. It helps me know these stories are reaching the people who need to hear them. Also, if you find strength or solace in hearing about journeys like mine, consider subscribing. My hope is that by sharing my story, I can shine a light for others who are still navigating their own dark passages. My family dynamic had always been complicated. Looking back, I see the fault lines were there from the beginning, subtle shifts beneath the surface of what appeared to be a normal, loving home. There was my mother, Sarah, a woman whose moods could shift like the tide, often sweet and nurturing, but capable of sudden, chilling withdrawal or pointed criticism that left you reeling. My father, Thomas, was quieter, less volatile, but his silence often felt like complicity, a passive acceptance of my mother's emotional terrain. My older brother, Mark, was their golden child, effortlessly charming and successful, seemingly immune to the emotional undercurrents that pulled at the rest of us. And then there was me, the sensitive, observant one, often feeling like I was speaking a different language, constantly trying to interpret the unspoken rules and navigate the unpredictable currents of my mother's affection and approval. As I grew older, the dynamics solidified. Mark could do no wrong. His achievements were celebrated grandly, his flaws excused with a shrug. My own accomplishments, while acknowledged, were often met with a caveat or a comparison that subtly diminished them. "That's nice, Rachel, but Mark's promotion came so quickly," or "Your painting is lovely, dear, but Mark was always so academic." It wasn't outright cruelty, not usually, but a persistent, low-grade invalidation that chipped away at my self-esteem over the years. I learned to minimize my successes, to temper my excitement, to try not to rock the boat or draw attention that might invite unfavorable comparison. The real trouble started, the kind that shattered the illusion of a functional family forever, when my grandmother, my father's mother, passed away. She had been a quiet, steady presence in my life, a calm harbor away from the emotional storms at home. She wasn't wealthy, but she owned a small, modest house, filled with decades of memories and practical, well-loved items. In her will, she divided her small estate between my father and his sister, Aunt Carol. The house was left to my father, with the understanding, though not legally binding, that it was intended to be a place for the family, a legacy of sorts. The significant portion of her modest savings she left to Aunt Carol, who had faced unexpected medical expenses and financial hardship in recent years. My grandmother had also included specific, personal bequests for each grandchild. To Mark, she left her antique watch, a valuable heirloom. To me, she left her collection of antique silver spoons. They weren't monetary significant, perhaps, but they held immense sentimental value for me. I remembered sitting with her as a child, polishing them, listening to her stories about where each one came from. They represented comfort, history, and a quiet connection that I cherished. The reading of the will was the first inkling that something was seriously wrong. My mother's reaction to Aunt Carol receiving the bulk of the savings was immediate and palpable. Her smile tightened, her eyes narrowed, and the air around her grew cold. Later, in the car ride home, the questions began, laced with suspicion. "Are you sure your grandmother intended that?" "It seems." Uneven, my father, as usual, remained silent, steering the car, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Over the next few weeks, my mother became fixated on the will. She questioned Aunt Carol incessantly, implying she must have influenced my grandmother, despite the clear wishes laid out in the document. Aunt Carol, a gentle and kind woman, was visibly distressed by these accusations. I tried to defend her, explaining that my grandmother had told me herself how worried she was about Carol's health and finances, how she wanted to ensure her daughter was secure. My mother dismissed my input with a wave of her hand. "You're just a child. You didn't understand. Your grandmother was old. She was confused. I was 28 years old at the time, a grown woman with a career and a life of my own, but in that moment, in her eyes, I was reduced to a naive child whose understanding of reality was less valid than her own narrative." Then came the issue of the house. My father inherited it, and the initial plan was to renovate it slightly and perhaps use it for family gatherings, or maybe even rent it out to help with expenses. But my mother had other ideas. She saw the house as an opportunity, a potential asset to leverage. She began talking about selling it quickly before the market changed. My father hesitated. He felt the weight of his mother's intentions. This is where my brother Mark entered the fray in a way that blindsided me. Mark had always seemed relatively detached from the family's internal squabbles. He lived his own life, focused on his career and his own growing family. But my mother, seeing his influence with my father, began to lobby him intensely. She painted a picture of financial prudence, arguing that selling the house was the only sensible option, that my father shouldn't be burdened by renovations or managing a rental property. She framed it as protecting my father, as making a smart financial decision for their future. What I didn't know was the extent to which she was also manipulating Mark by playing on his ambition and perhaps making him promises about how the proceeds would be used, subtly suggesting it would benefit him in some way down the line. I loved that house. It held so many precious memories of my grandmother, of a time when things felt simpler and safer. The thought of it being sold, demolished perhaps, or lived in by strangers, felt like losing a piece of her all over again. I spoke to my father, appealing to his connection to his mother. "Dad," I said, "Grandma wanted this house to stay in the family.
She talked about it."
It's not just a house, it's her legacy." He listened, he nodded, but his eyes held that familiar, passive look. He was torn between my mother's forceful will and his own quiet sense of duty to his mother's memory. My mother, sensing my resistance, shifted her tactics. She stopped discussing the house directly with me and instead began talking about me to other family members, subtly undermining my position. She painted me as overly emotional, sentimental to a fault, incapable of seeing the practical realities of the situation. She implied I was being difficult, selfishly clinging to the past and obstructing a necessary financial decision for my parents. "Rachel is making this so hard," I overheard her tell a distant cousin at a family gathering. "She just doesn't understand how much work that old house is, how much money it will take. She's living in a fantasy." The worst part was when she drew Mark into it more directly. She must have fed him her narrative, because one evening, Mark called me. I thought it was a casual chat, but he quickly steered the conversation towards the house. "Rachel," he said, his tone patient but firm, like he was explaining something simple to a child. "Mom's right. It's just a house. It's old, it needs work. Selling it is the smart move for Mom and Dad." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Mark, it's Grandma's house. It means something. She wanted it to stay." "She was old, Ratch," he interrupted, using the nickname he hadn't used in years, a calculated move that felt both condescending and like a false attempt at closeness. "Maybe she said things, but Mom and Dad need to be practical.
Think about them.
They need to be comfortable in their retirement." His words hit me like a physical blow. Not only was he dismissing my feelings and my grandmother's wishes, but he was using my mother's exact language, the same talking points she had been using to manipulate others. It wasn't just disagreement. It felt like he had fully absorbed her narrative and was now actively participating in gaslighting me, making me feel unreasonable for valuing sentiment over pure financial gain. "Comfortable?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Dad inherited savings too. It's not like they're destitute. This is about more than money, Mark. It's about legacy, about respecting Grandma's wishes. You're being dramatic, he said, his tone hardening slightly. You always were. This isn't healthy, Rachel, holding on to things like this. You need to be realistic. Realistic? Was it unrealistic to feel a connection to my grandmother's home, to want her memory honored? Was it dramatic to push back against what felt like a blatant disregard for her intentions and a cold, calculated financial grab? The conversation spiraled, quickly becoming an argument where he reiterated my mother's points, minimizing my feelings and painting me as an obstacle to the family's well-being. He hung up with a sigh of exasperation, leaving me feeling isolated and deeply hurt. That call was the first major betrayal. It wasn't just my mother anymore. My brother, my golden child brother who was supposed to be on my side, or at least neutral, had actively joined her in the campaign against me. He had become her echo chamber, her enforcer, validating her narrative and helping to push me further to the fringes. The selling of the house proceeded swiftly after that. With Mark on her side, my father seemed to give up his quiet resistance. The house was sold, the proceeds added to my parents' accounts. There was no discussion about what happened to the money, no acknowledgement of my grandmother's wishes, just a sense of cold efficiency. But the house was just the beginning. The silver spoons, my grandmother's sentimental gift to me, became the next battleground. Shortly after the house was sold, my mother asked for the spoons. "I'll take them," she said one afternoon, holding out her hand. "I can keep them safe for you." Alarm bells went off in my head. "Mom, Grandma gave them to me. I want to keep them here, at my place." "Don't be silly," she said, her voice sweet but edged with steel. "They're valuable. They should be properly insured. And besides, I don't think you have anywhere to display them properly. They belong in the family home." "They're my family home now, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Grandma wanted me to have them. They are important to me." Her expression shifted instantly. The sweetness vanished, replaced by that chilling, dismissive look. "Don't be selfish, Rachel. They've been in this family for generations. They shouldn't just disappear into your apartment." She made it sound like I was planning to melt them down for scrap metal. I refused to give them to her. I explained, calmly at first, how much they meant to me, the memories they held. She became increasingly agitated, her voice rising. She accused me of being ungrateful, of not appreciating the real value of the spoons, of being difficult just to spite her. "It's always something with you, isn't it?" she spat. "You always have to make things complicated. Why can't you just do this one simple thing?" The simple thing was giving up something precious that was legally and sentimentally mine, handing it over to someone who had just demonstrated a willingness to disregard my grandmother's wishes for financial gain. I saw the pattern repeating itself. She wanted control. She wanted to control these last, tangible links to my grandmother that weren't hers. I stood my ground. I said no, firmly, but without shouting. I told her I loved her, but the spoons were mine, and I was keeping them. The atmosphere turned arctic. She left shortly after, without another word, her face set in a mask of cold fury. The aftermath of the spoon incident was swift and brutal. My mother began a targeted campaign against me. She called other family members, relatives I had been close to, and told them a distorted version of events. She said I had become greedy, selfish, and difficult. She claimed I was trying to hoard family heirlooms and had been incredibly disrespectful to her when she had merely offered to safeguard the spoons. She twisted my words, my intentions, painting me as the villain. The calls started coming to me. Relatives who I had always felt were on my side, or were at least neutral, suddenly had a cool tone in their voice. "Rachel, I heard about the spoons," one cousin said, their voice laced with disapproval. "Your mother is very upset." Another said, "Why are you making such a fuss? They're just spoons. Why can't you let your mother keep them for now?" I tried to explain my side, to share the context of the house sale, my grandmother's wishes, the emotional significance of the spoons to me. But their minds seemed already made up. My mother's narrative, delivered with her signature blend of victimhood and righteous indignation, had taken root. I realized with a sickening lurch that she had been cultivating this image of me for a long time, laying the groundwork for moments like this. My father remained largely silent through all of this. When I tried to talk to him, to express my hurt and confusion about my mother's actions and the reactions of other family members, he would sigh, look away, and say things like, "You know how your mother is," or "It's probably best not to make a big deal out of this." His passivity felt like a betrayal of its own kind. I desperately needed him to stand up, to say, "Sarah, stop," or "Rachel is right, the spoons are hers." But he never did. He chose peace at any cost, and the cost was my emotional well-being and my place in the family structure. Mark's involvement deepened. He didn't just echo my mother's narrative, he actively reinforced it to others. He would tell cousins, aunts, and uncles how I was being unreasonable and causing unnecessary drama over trivial matters. He portrayed himself as the voice of reason, trying to mediate my stubbornness. His participation in this felt like the deepest cut, a betrayal of the bond we shared as siblings. He wasn't just disagreeing with me, he was actively collaborating in my isolation. The emotional impact was devastating. I felt like I was drowning. The people I had always relied on, my family, had turned on me. I was constantly on edge, dreading phone calls or family events. I started withdrawing, canceling plans, unable to face the thinly veiled judgment and the feeling of being an outsider in my own family. I questioned myself constantly. Was I really being selfish? Was I overreacting? Their collective disapproval felt like a heavy weight, crushing my spirit. I lost sleep, my appetite vanished, and I struggled to focus at work. My physical health started to suffer. The stress manifested as chronic headaches and a constant ache in my chest. I felt a profound sense of grief, not just for my grandmother, but for the family I thought I had. It was like watching a beloved photograph fade before my eyes, the colors leaching away until only a pale, ghostly image remained. I tried, desperately, to bridge the gap. I wrote letters explaining my perspective, hoping that seeing my words on paper might break through the narrative they had constructed. I offered to talk, to listen, to find a way forward. But my efforts were met with silence, curt dismissals, or reiterations of their accusations. "You need to apologize to your mother," my father said flatly one day, after I had tried to explain my hurt. "Apologize for what?" I asked, bewildered. "For keeping something that was given to me? For having feelings? For causing trouble," he said. "For upsetting her. Just let it go, Rachel. Let it go." The phrase became a mantra of their dismissal. Let go of my feelings, let go of my grandmother's wishes, let go of my own truth. It was easier for them if I just disappeared, emotionally and physically, if I ceased to be a person with valid feelings and became just a source of inconvenience. The holidays became particularly painful. Gatherings I used to look forward to were fraught with tension. There were strained smiles, pointed silences when I entered a room, conversations that stopped abruptly. My mother would speak to me minimally, her tone cold and formal. Mark avoided eye contact, or if he did speak to me, it was with a detached politeness that felt colder than outright anger. I felt like a ghost at the feast, present, but invisible, unwanted. It was during this period of intense isolation and emotional pain that I realized I couldn't keep trying to fit myself back into a family structure that was actively rejecting me. I couldn't force them to understand, to validate, or to love me in the way I needed. My attempts to gain their approval, or even just their basic respect, were only causing me more pain. I was pouring all my energy into a bottomless pit, hoping to fill it with their validation, but they were only interested in digging it deeper. This was the turning point. The struggle for external validation had exhausted me. I had to shift my focus inward. I started seeing a therapist, someone outside the family drama, who could offer an objective perspective. That was one of the best decisions I ever made. My therapist helped me understand the dynamics at play, the narcissism, the triangulation, the emotional manipulation. She helped me see that my reactions were normal and healthy responses to an unhealthy situation, not proof that I was the problematic one. She also helped me understand that I couldn't change my family. Their behavior was deeply ingrained. My mother's need for control, my father's passive avoidance, Mark's willingness to align himself with power. These were not things I could fix with logic, emotional appeals, or apologies I didn't mean. The only thing I could control was my own response and my own boundaries. Boundaries setting felt terrifying at first. It meant risking further conflict, further rejection. But the alternative was to continue living in a state of constant anxiety and pain, sacrificing my own well-being on the altar of a toxic family dynamic. My therapist helped me identify what I needed: space, respect, and an end to the constant criticism and manipulation. I started small. I stopped answering every phone call. I limited my responses to texts. I declined invitations to family gatherings that I knew would be emotionally draining. When I did attend, I gave myself permission to leave early if I felt overwhelmed. I practiced saying no to requests that felt like emotional traps. Initially, these boundaries were met with resistance. My mother would call repeatedly, leaving passive-aggressive voicemails. Mark would text asking why I wasn't participating more. Other relatives would relay messages of disappointment or concern, manufactured by my mother. The pressure was immense. There were moments I almost caved, wondering if it would be easier to just go back to the way things were, burying my feelings and playing along. But then I would remember the suffocating feeling of being constantly judged and misunderstood, the physical toll it had taken. I would remember the betrayal, and I would hold firm. The real test, the climax of this painful chapter, came several months later, during the planning for my parents' anniversary party. My mother decided she wanted a large, formal celebration. She began making demands, expecting me to help with decorations, invitations, and logistics, treating me as if nothing had happened, as if we were still a perfectly harmonious family. I received an email from her outlining a long list of tasks she expected me to handle. It was framed not as a request, but as an assignment. My name was simply listed next to items like coordinate guest list, arrange photographer, and handle cake order. There was no acknowledgement of the distance that had grown between us, no apology for the hurt she had caused, just this blithe assumption of my willing participation. Reading that email, something inside me snapped. I had spent months healing, rebuilding my sense of self-worth, understanding that I deserved to be treated with respect. This email felt like a direct assault on the fragile peace I had found. It was her way of asserting control, of forcing me back into the role of the obedient, obliging daughter, despite everything that had happened. I discussed it with my therapist. We talked about what I needed to say, how I needed to say it, and what I was willing and unwilling to do. I drafted a response, measured and firm, but it felt too cold. I needed to speak my truth, not just set a boundary, but articulate why the boundary was necessary. I decided to call my mother. I knew it would be difficult, perhaps even explosive, but I couldn't let the email stand unanswered, couldn't let her continue to pretend everything was fine while simultaneously treating me like an unpaid, emotionally abused event planner. I called her one evening, taking deep breaths to steady my nerves. She answered, her voice initially breezy. "Oh, Rachel, dear, calling about the party?" "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and even. "I got your email about the anniversary party." "Yes, isn't it exciting?" she chirped. "I've got so much to do. I knew I could count on you to pitch in." "Mom, I can't help with the party," I said, the words feeling heavy but necessary. Silence. A beat, then her voice changed, losing its lightness. "What do you mean you can't help? It's your parents' anniversary." "I know," I said. "But after everything that's happened, how you've treated me, how you turned the family against me, I can't just pretend none of that happened and jump back into things." Her voice became sharp, defensive. "Treated you?
What are you talking about?"
"I don't know what you're talking about. Mom, you spread rumors about me. You told people I was selfish and greedy over grandma's spoons. You involved Mark and others in painting me as the problem when all I did was keep something Grandma wanted me to have and express how I felt about the house." "That's not true," she practically shrieked. "I never did any of that. You're imagining things. You're the one who caused all the trouble. You're the one who upset everyone." This was the moment. The absolute refusal to take responsibility, The immediate counterattack, the gaslighting. In the past, this is where I would have crumbled, doubted myself, tried to explain more, pleaded for understanding. But not this time. I remembered everything I had learned, everything I had felt. "Mom," I said, my voice gaining strength and clarity, "I am not imagining things. This happened. You hurt me deeply. You betrayed my trust, and you undermined my relationships with other family members. And frankly, your email pretending everything is normal and expecting me to work on your party as if nothing is wrong. It's disrespectful. It shows you have no understanding or care for the pain you caused." "How dare you speak to me like that?" she screeched, her voice now laced with pure fury. "After everything I've done for you, you are an ungrateful, selfish child. Just like I told everyone." There it was. The quiet part said out loud. "Just like I told everyone." "Yes, Mom," I said, my voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer force of emotion. "You did tell everyone.
And it worked.
You alienated me from my own family. You succeeded. Well, maybe you deserve it," she yelled. "Maybe if you weren't so difficult, this wouldn't have happened. Maybe," I said, my voice dropping, filled with a profound sadness and a strange sense of calm that comes with hitting rock bottom and realizing you're still standing. "Maybe the problem isn't me being difficult, Mom. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle it when I'm not exactly who you want me to be. Maybe the problem is that you prioritize control and your own narrative over my feelings and my well-being." She was silent for a moment, perhaps taken aback by my directness. Then, her voice returned, cold and flat, utterly devoid of warmth. "If that's how you feel, Rachel, then I don't see what there is to talk about.
Don't come to the party.
Don't bother." "I wasn't planning to," I said quietly. She hung up without another word. That call was the climax. It wasn't a reconciliation, wasn't a moment of sudden understanding on her part. It was a definitive break, a severing of the pretense. I had finally spoken my truth, not to convince her, but for myself. I had stood up for myself, validated my own experience, and refused to participate in the lie. It was terrifying, and it hurt more than I can adequately describe, but it was also incredibly empowering. I had chosen myself. The immediate aftermath was difficult. There were texts from Mark, expressing disappointment and urging me to make up with Mom before the party. I responded to him directly, calmly explaining that I had tried, but our conversation had shown me that reconciliation wasn't possible while my mother refused to acknowledge the hurt she had caused.
He didn't respond.
The silence from my family was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional passive-aggressive message relayed through a relative who hadn't fully taken a side. The anniversary party happened without me. I saw pictures on social media later. My parents looked happy, surrounded by family members, including Mark and his wife. Looking at those pictures, I felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss for the family I had wanted, the family I had mourned. But beneath the sadness was a layer of peace. I was safe. I wasn't there, walking on eggshells, feeling invisible and judged. I was at home, in my own space, finally free from the pressure to perform a role that no longer fit me. My journey towards healing wasn't linear. There were days filled with doubt and sadness, moments where I second-guessed my decisions. Grief for the lost relationship came in waves. But my therapist helped me process these feelings. I learned that it's okay to grieve relationships with people who are still alive, especially when those relationships are fundamentally broken or have changed in ways that are harmful. I also started to build my own support system. I leaned on trusted friends, explaining the situation, the nuances of family dynamics they might not have understood. They listened without judgment, offered comfort, and reminded me of my worth. I joined a support group for adults dealing with difficult family relationships. Hearing other people's stories, realizing I wasn't alone in experiencing this kind of pain and betrayal, was incredibly validating and empowering. This is where the idea of a healing circle really took shape for me, not necessarily in the literal sense of the title initially given, but as a metaphor for the community I built around myself, a circle of understanding, empathy, and support that I had lacked in my family. I created this circle through therapy, through friends, through support groups, and by connecting with others who understood the specific pain of familial conflict and betrayal. I learned to trust my own intuition, to recognize red flags in relationships, and to set and enforce healthy boundaries without guilt. I focused on nurturing the relationships that were healthy and reciprocal. I invested time and energy in friendships where I felt seen, heard, and valued. I rediscovered hobbies and activities that brought me joy. I learned to rely on my own judgment and to trust that I was capable of making good decisions for myself, even if those decisions were unpopular with my family. The silver spoons remained with me. I found a beautiful way to display them, not hidden away, but visible, a quiet tribute to my grandmother and a symbol of my resilience. They weren't just metal objects. They represented the part of my history I chose to honor, the connection I chose to keep, and the strength I found in protecting what was mine. The resolution of my family situation is not a neat, happily ever after ending. It's a changed dynamic, a cautious acceptance of a new reality. Contact with my parents is minimal now. We exchange polite, superficial messages on holidays. Phone calls are short and infrequent, carefully navigated to avoid any mention of the past or any potential for conflict. There are no more spontaneous visits, no more shared family dinners. My relationship with Mark is strained. We are cordial when we cross paths, but the closeness we once shared is gone. The betrayal, the way he aligned himself with my mother's narrative and helped to isolate me, created a rift that feels irreparable. It's a source of sadness, but I've accepted that sometimes relationships, even sibling relationships, cannot survive certain breaches of trust. My father, in his quiet way, occasionally reaches out with a brief, neutral text, a small olive branch perhaps, or simply a sign that he hasn't forgotten me. I respond kindly, keeping the interactions light. I understand his limitations, his inability to stand up to my mother, and while I still grieve the father-daughter relationship I wished we had, I no longer expect him to be someone he is not. Aunt Carol and I remain close. She was one of the few family members who saw through my mother's manipulation and offered quiet support. Our bond deepened through this experience, a silver lining in a dark cloud. I haven't attended a major family gathering since the anniversary party. It's painful to be excluded, but it's less painful than being present and invisible, or worse, being subjected to passive aggression and judgment. I have chosen peace over proximity, emotional safety over superficial connection. What I learned from this experience is that family, in its biological sense, is not always synonymous with love, support, or belonging. Sometimes the people who are supposed to lift you up are the ones who try to hold you down. I learned that you have the right to protect your peace, even if it means creating distance from those who are supposed to be closest to you. I learned that your feelings are valid, your truth matters, and you do not need anyone else's validation to know your own worth. I also learned the incredible power of creating your own chosen family, your own healing circle, made up of people who see you, accept you, and love you for who you are, without agenda or condition. These are the people who fill your cup, not drain it. Thank you for listening to my story. It was difficult to share, but also cathartic. If you've faced similar challenges with your family, if you've had to set difficult boundaries or navigate betrayal, please share your experience in the comments below. Knowing we are not alone is incredibly powerful. If this story resonated with you, if any part of my journey connected with yours, please hit that like button. And if you want to hear more stories about navigating complex relationships, setting boundaries, and finding your voice, don't forget to subscribe. Your support means the world to me. Remember, your story is valid. Your feelings matter. You are not alone. And you have the strength within you to create the life and the connections you deserve, even if it means letting go of the ones you thought you were supposed to have. Speak your truth, set your boundaries, and build your own healing circle. You are worth it.